Hi, I'm Jessica, and when I'm not drinking all the coffee, watching Razorback sports, or hanging out with my family of boys, it's my passion to help elementary music teachers just like you find your unique teaching style. My goal with this podcast is to share helpful tips, strategies, and to give you the motivation you need to gain momentum in your teaching so you can continue being the music teacher rock star you already are. Hey y'all, welcome back to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Peresta, and you're listening to episode 92 with Melissa Stouffer. Melissa Stouffer is amazing, and I loved having a conversation with her, and she's on the podcast today to talk all about teaching solfege. This is a conversation I loved having because she dropped some truth bombs, that things that I've never heard before, maybe even things I didn't even know about teaching solfege that she really did enlighten me about. And I know it'll really help you, whether you have taught solfege before with your students, whether you've never used it before, or if you're just looking for new ideas. I know that this episode will help you so much. One thing she says in our episode, pretty much right off the bat, that I love that she said is that solfege gives kids a tool they can sit down and use, and they can be sufficient with a limited amount of notes. They can even look at it and read the notes and make sense of it to figure out how the song goes before you teach it to them. Another thing she says that I love is that, which this is, I feel like, true with anything you teach in music class, is that you don't need to be the facilitator. You shouldn't be, because the end goal of a music teacher isn't for them to rely on you, but for them to be able to make music by themselves. And whether you're a general classroom teacher, majority of you guys are elementary music teachers, hence the title of this podcast. But also, solfege, she says, doesn't just have to be used for choir or general music. You can even use it in a band setting. So you can use it in so many different ways, which she presents in this episode. So while you're listening to this episode, I know you're going to get so many great ideas that you can begin implementing with your students. So let's go ahead and jump right in with episode 92. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to have Melissa here with us today, and she's going to tell us all the things about solfege. And so I'm so excited to pick her brain today. Before I do, I would love Melissa to just tell us a little bit more about herself.
Okay. So, hi, I'm super excited to be here. I've been really looking forward to this. I am a music teacher in Michigan. This is my 10th year teaching. I'm Kodály Level Two certified, and Kodály is not very big in Michigan. So I'm really excited to talk about solfege the way that I teach it. And hopefully the way I talk about it to you today will give you some ideas. Even if you aren't Kodály certified, there's a lot you can do that you don't need that certification to be able to teach solfege effectively. And I'm just super geeked to be here.
Yeah. So I was telling you before we started recording that, ironically, one of the main questions I get asked a lot by teachers who are either new to teaching or didn't, get a music ed degree and became a music teacher kind of, I don't want to say by default, but pretty much it was like, hey, we have a music position open and we found out you play piano. Do you want it? And so I get asked, what is all the time, what is solfege and what is the importance of it? What is the value of it? And so let's start off by just asking you, what exactly is solfege and why is it important in the elementary music classroom?
Okay, so solfege is basically this system developed by this Italian monk 1,000 years ago as kind of the first way of being able to write down music. So he basically kind of invented these syllables based on the syllable that the monks were singing on the note where it hit in the scale. And they weren't actually singing a full scale. It was a hexachord, and he kind of named it that. And then you might know of the hand that had like all of the solfege syllables all over it, and people used it kind of as like their first sort of notation. So basically it's the way they spelled out the scale way back when that was so, I don't know, invented so well. I'm not saying that correctly, but
no,
it
that
was
makes
so
sense.
well done that people still are using it 1,000 years later to give us a way to read pitches without having the aid of, somebody playing your part for you.
In your opinion, what is the importance of including solfege in an elementary music classroom, would you say?
Okay, so for that, there's a bunch of different reasons. First of all, it gives the kids a tool that they can actually sit down and use, and you don't have to help them. They can be self-sufficient even within a limited number of notes at a first grade level. I mean, you're not going to give them a full, massive chromatic scale or something at that level, but they can look at it, read the notes, and make sense of it and find how a song goes before they can hear you play it. You don't need to be the facilitator in everything, and you shouldn't be, because the end goal of a music teacher is not to have your students rely on you, but for them to be able to make music by themselves. And there's even applications for choir. It's a big thing. I think a lot of people realize that. But even in an instrumental music classroom, there's a number of Kodály certified teachers that are exploring instrumental uses as well, because it helps the instrumentalists play more in tune. They know what they're going to sound like before they play. The applications are kind of unlimited.
So for a teacher listening that's not fully aware of what solfege is, I know a lot of times it's just known as the hand signals. And so there's a lot more to solfege than just that, right? And so when do you suggest, or how do you suggest, I should say, incorporating the hand signals into solfege in the elementary music classroom?
Okay, so the hand signs are actually from another person. They're not really technically related, but they were put with it, and now we use them. And the reason you want to use them is because it's another kinesthetic approach to learning, and you don't want to just do a static hand like right in front of your chest, like going do, re, mi at the same level. You actually want to raise your hand, lower your hand. Some people actually use body signs instead as like a precursor to the hand sign, and when they present the solfege concept, then they give them the hand sign, and it becomes a new tool, and they actually know the name. They know the hand sign. So it becomes a symbol of what that note is for them.
Yeah, that really helps break it down with how to use those. I love that you said not to just keep the hand signs in front of your body, but to move them higher and lower, because it's helping the kiddos recognize that pitches are moving higher and lower as well. And so I think that's a good point you made. Yeah.
And it's funny because even like if your little ones are having trouble finding even that so mi interval, if you make them use the hand signs when their hands are going up and down, it'll get them a little more in tune because their body has to do it. So that's really important.
And like you said, it's great for those kinesthetic learners. I feel like as music teachers, sometimes we forget that all the different learning styles, it's important to incorporate all the different learning styles in the music room as well. So that's a perfect way to do that.
Although it's funny, I think music teachers are sometimes better at that than other teachers because we do so much movement.
Yeah. And probably even, what's the word I'm looking for? Not unconsciously, without even being aware you're doing it. I think music teachers just automatically, teach all the different learning styles without knowing, they're not sitting there lesson planning saying, okay, well, I'm going to include this one, this one, this. And a lot of times you do that in your plans, but you just do it. You just, so much goes on.
So ingrained into what we're doing anyways.
Yes.
It would feel unnatural to not.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk about your any favorite ways to use solfege in the music room? Any ideas or activities, or how do you like to use it in the music room?
So for me, solfege is kind of something that you prep it, and this is very much a Kodály idea. Okay. You prepare the concept with a bunch of different things. You do an oral preparation, kinesthetic, visual, and then they get to a certain point, and the visual is actually the last thing you want to prepare, because if you're showing them the visuals, kind of trying to see if they can sing the notes and identify the pattern that you're specifically looking for, and you're showing it to them, they don't really figure it out themselves. But so that's kind of the last thing. Then you present it. And like I said before, for presentation, you show them the note where it is on the lines and spaces. You give them the hand sign. You tell them the name of the note. And then you go on to the practice. And practice is kind of a really big thing. And in my earlier teaching, I didn't realize how big a deal the practice section of teaching a solfege concept really was. To me, it was kind of like, okay, we're preparing. Here you go. Okay, let's move on. And I didn't really comprehend that. So the biggest thing that somebody told me this summer, in fact, it was Susan Brumfield. I took my level 2 at Portland State this summer. And the biggest thing that I learned that I think everybody needs to learn is that you don't prepare every single mutation of a concept. So if you're teaching do as your new note, you don't need to prepare so, mi, do, mi, so, do, la, mi, la, do, all of those different concepts. The kids will latch on to the new note with one specific target pattern. So, mi, do works really well because you're walking down to it. And then when you're practicing, you can bring in songs that have the other patterns. They're going to experience them in songs as you're moving on to the next solfege concept. So practicing doesn't really end. It's not like a unit, like this is the do unit, this is all you do, and we're never going to talk about do again because it's really unrealistic. So that was the biggest thing. And I wish that somebody had told me that 10 years ago, because I spent so much time practicing like re to so, waiting for my kids to get re to so before I would tell them what so is. And, looking at re is, and I'm going back like, oh my gosh, what was I doing?
Yeah.
So please take that away. If you take nothing else out of this podcast, that's the thing you need to remember. But there are so many different tools that I love to play with this. And I, if you want to include in the show notes, I'll be happy to send you a list of some of the games that I just presented on recently for Mike. There's some really, really fun different games that we talked about. Anytime that you can make it a game or a challenge between kids is the best thing you can do. And something that I add in for solfege, I actually do this Mount Solfege story, which sounds kind of crazy, but it's actually really funny. Would you like me to read you the story? It'll take a couple minutes, but I think you might appreciate it.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so once upon a time, there was a beautiful town called Music Town. Above the town, there was a beautiful but oddly shaped hill called Mount Solfege. No one lived there because it was covered in trees. One day, a builder thought it would be the perfect place to put houses to overlook Music Town. So he had the land cleared and placed the land for sale. Soon, Mount Solfege caught the attention of a buyer. He wanted to move, but didn't want to be too far from town. He bought the third step on the hill to stay near the town. A house was built for Mr. Me to be the first resident of Mount Solfege. He lives on the third step of the hill. Soon he got a new neighbor. She moved 2 steps up the hill. Miss So loved her new house on Mount Solfege. For a while, they were the only 2 neighbors on the hill. But after a little time had passed, Miss So noticed a sold sign on the step above her. A cute cottage was built, and soon there was a smell of fresh cookies. They had a new neighbor. Grandma Law had moved onto the step above Miss So. Mount Solfege has been getting a lot of attention. An important man to Music Town thought it would be nice to move to the hill, but he didn't want to move too far up since he needed to be close to town for his job. He bought the bottom step of Mount Solfege. Now the bottom step of the hill is home to Mayor Doe. Soon after Mayor Doe moved in, a new house was built on the step above him. The pentatonic family moved in with their new baby. The neighbors were very excited that baby Ray lived on Mount Solfege. Shortly after, Mayor Doe's mother, Mama Doe, decided she wanted to move near her son. She decided she wanted a beautiful view, so she bought the top step on the hill. The builder who had cleared Mount Solfege began to get nervous that his houses were selling so well and he only had a few steps left on the hill. There was a small hill below Mount Solfege that had not been cleared called the Ledgers. He decided that since Mount Solfege was so popular, he would clear that for houses too. When the land had been cleared, there were 3 new steps on the Ledgers for sale before you reached the flat wetlands and the sharp mountain range. People were interested in the new steps right away. Grandma La's granddaughter, Lola, moved in with her parents into the first new house in the Ledgers. Miss So's cousin, Mr. Lowell So, moved into the bottom step of the Ledgers. His friends called him Low. With only 3 houses left on the hills, the last houses were bought very fast because people didn't want their chance to miss their chance to live on the hill. Mr. Me finally convinced his best friend to move to the neighborhood. Mr. Fa moved onto the step above his best friend. It was nice they weren't too far away. As the neighborhood had grown and people became friends, everyone noticed that the last spot on Mount Solfege had finally sold. Timmy T and his family moved into the last available house on Mount Solfege. Timmy was blind, so his leader dog, Major, went with him everywhere he went. Having them complete the steps was a major big deal. On the last step of the Ledgers, another major moved in. This time, he was Major Tito, a retired Army major. Having him on the hill completed the houses in the grandest hills around. So that's the little story I tell the kids. And there's a lot of different variations on Melody Street. I actually wrote this one and I was taking my time. I finally made it look pretty, but this was something that every single time I presented a new note to any class, I would have to draw the whole thing on the board. Yes. And I mean, my terrible stick drawings, and the kids would be laughing and stuff. So last year, the class that was finally going to get through all of the 5 years of elementary music with me, I finished it for them to make it look pretty. And I had a kid literally cry in class going, "It's the end of an era." Aww. It was the best thing ever. I know. And I'm my own feeder. So I built in some different things that they'll need even in middle school music. So we talk about the grand staff and the sharps and flats. And so that way those concepts are kind of initialized a little bit too. Yeah. So I've been meaning to kind of record this and put it up on YouTube. So maybe I will do that and send you a link as well. Yeah. So if your listeners want to reference this, they can.
Oh, totally. And I was going to say,
a really fun one.
Oh yeah. I was going to say, while you were reading that, I can just see music teachers everywhere just pushing play on this podcast episode and playing that for their students because it was amazing. No, and it's so helpful. And, kids love stories and bringing stories in the music room and to help them visualize what's going where on the mountain. I love that.
Yes. And it's funny because it really helps them visualize who's in relation to who, and they know where people are in between, and they don't get confused on which order the solfege concepts go in. Although I totally had a kid, now she's an 8th grader. She actually named Baby Ray before we got to Ray. She goes, "I know what the next character is. It's Baby Ray, isn't it?" And I'm like, yeah. So she totally named it.
That's so funny. Oh, I love that.
Right. But anything that you can do to kind of catch that relationship between the notes is super important too. And something with this story that's important that I also learned this summer is I never had been taught to teach step and skip as part of teaching solfege. But once you do, if you're going, with the first graders, me and So are a skip away. And then you get to So and La, and they're only a step away, and they can actually really visualize this if you're drawing for them these little stair step, hill kind of deals, and that's really helpful too. So it was kind of I actually went back with my 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders and put that language in for them when I got back from summer this year, and they're all kind of like, "Oh, okay, I get it." It was kind of an eye opener for a lot of and myself as well. So
yeah. But I feel like that's okay to go back and revisit things with your students.
I think absolutely. If you find something that is going to be an eye opener for at least if it's one kid that didn't get it and it's going to fix it for them, it's super worth going back and taking care of it. I agree with you on that.
Oh, completely. Well, and every summer, like you said, you're going to take professional development or a levels course, and you're going to learn a whole lot of new things that you're so excited to come back and introduce to your students, or go back and say, hey, I know you're in 5th grade now, but when you were in 4th grade, let's go back and revisit this because I have something else to tell you about it. I think that's totally fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would love to ask you about pertaining, well, let's just say lower and upper elementary. This is a question I get asked a lot too, is what pitches do I teach when? And that's so confusing, especially to a teacher that hasn't taken Kodály. So is there a simple way to break that down?
There actually really is kind of a simple way to break that down, which is surprising. Okay. So the big question that goes around, and I see this, it's funny in the Facebook groups a lot. What do you do? Do you do do, re, mi, or do you do mi, so, la? Which one? Where do you, so I think if you're starting with 2nd grade or down, you can build that mi, so, la pattern really quickly, because mi, so, la is really kind of all solfege concepts that you introduce in 1st grade. And then in 2nd grade, you get do and re, and you finish out the pentatonic scale. So for them, it makes a lot of sense because you can kind of catch up them or start there. If you're starting with 3rd grader up, or if you're starting with kids that really have had a lot of songs that have the, mi, re, do. The Kodály police are not going to come catch me for this because it's your program, no matter what, in the end of the day, it's how you want to teach it. Starting with do, re, mi works really well in American schools because a lot of our folk songs have, do, re, mi as the base of a lot of the endings, as a lot of the beginnings, or even just the song itself. The system was kind of developed thinking that in different countries, people would adapt their own folk songs. Well, some of the people in the earlier adapters of Kodály just kind of were like, okay, let's do mi, so, la, because that's what the Hungarian folk songs kind of focused on. But there are, and people give the criticism that there's not a lot of folk songs in America that work on that. And, there's a lot of like quote unquote folk songs now that are really just kind of little composed ditties that we use and kind of get passed along as folk songs. But we still have the, na 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 na, that's mi, so, la, really, if you break it down. So our kids are familiar with it. And that's always my argument to that too. I'm like, yeah, but have you ever heard them on the playground with their friend? So that's really that, right? That's really that spot where you want to break it down, I think, and change it is that kind of 2nd to 3rd grade. And I guess part of it depends on your kids too. If you have a bunch of 2nd graders that are, a little more worldly than, another group, maybe you do want to start on mi, re, do so they don't feel like they're being pandered to. And I think that's a really big, important part about teaching no matter what. If you're starting with older beginners, you don't want to go, okay, well, you missed this, so we're going to go back and do this. They're going to hate you the second you say that. Like the kids still need to feel like they're being respected. So, kind of look at your kids too and make the choice that's going to work for you and be comfortable with you. Because it doesn't really matter as long as you cover them in the end. Yeah. Older beginners, I definitely say though, do, re, mi, because they're just not going to respond the same way to mi, so, la songs. And as soon as you get into do, re, mi, you add so and la, and you're in the pentatonic and everything's fine anyways. And it moves a little faster because they're a little older as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super helpful. So when I started teaching at my school that didn't have music for 7 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this was a long time ago, my first school. And it was one of the biggest pieces of advice I was given by my actually cooperating teacher when I student taught. I looked at her and I was like, I don't, and I've met so many teachers who are in the same boat and they're like, but I can't teach the 4th and 5th grade standards because they're not there, And so literally she looked at me and she said, just get the kids singing. And I was like, what? But then I was so stressed out about but it says 5th graders should sing these songs and they should sing these pitches. Right. And it was like, yes. And I did that. I was like, you know what? I'm going to have my kindergartners get to where I need them in 5 years, 6 years. But, but I feel like that is so stressful when a teacher comes into a situation like that and they know, but off this workshop, they said 4th and 5th grade should do this, but Don't compare yourself. It goes back to the beginning. Don't compare yourself because your situation's not going to look like anyone else's.
Right. I'm super with you on that. And even then, if you look at the standards, like there's so much across the age groups that's the same. With our kindergartners and first graders, it's not like we're singing only me so, la. The kids would be bored. You would be bored. We'd all be over it, and it just wouldn't happen. And that's not joyful music making. And for that, you really, you should be singing other notes with your kids. And that's actually part of like long planning preparation, is that they are exposed to it way in advance to when you're ever going to think about presenting it to them. Just building that language, the more they sing it, they'll hear it. You're just not using it in isolation.
Yeah. Okay. So a teacher listening who said solfege is just brand new and they're saying, I'm so overwhelmed. How do I get started? What tips or strategies would you give them to just get started simply in their classroom with solfege?
Okay. So what I would do if you're brand new at this and you've never taught solfege and you're like, what do I do? Isolate. So you're not going to sit down with second grade or fourth grade and give them all the notes to the scale and expect them to use them. That's kind of like the same. And I hope she never listens to this. I have a friend from college who told me that she's not teaching music, so I'm really hoping she doesn't listen to this.
Okay, you're probably good then.
Although she was a music major, so we met up for lunch, and she's like, "Oh yeah, my daughter, she knows all the solfege names. She can sing the do re mi song." I'm like, there's so much. You know this. You know better than this. There's so much more to it than do re mi. Like everybody knows, the song. That doesn't mean that you can apply it or use it or look at it and break it down. Like you're just like repeating something.
Yeah.
So, like preschoolers know all their ABCs. That doesn't mean they can read them or write them or go on from there.
Ooh, that's a good point.
It's really, truly the exact same thing. So break it down. Take the first couple notes that you're working on, because you can't start with just one. So you have to start with 2 or 3, depending if you're doing so mi or do re mi, and play games, introduce it, let the kids just enjoy making music, and then kind of call attention to it. Do you notice that there's a high-low? And if you're doing kindergarten, the high-low is definitely the first prep to solfege that you want to be talking about. So when you call it to attention, you're starting to set that kind of pattern for them. Is it, do you hear a low, middle, and a high note, or do you hear the high and the low? And, can somebody demonstrate for me, or can you show me with your body solfege? And can you, now that we're getting a little more into it, can you put it on a line? Grab a piece of yarn and those cute dollar erasers from Target, and everybody gets a piece of yarn, and can you put the high, low, or, because you're not saying so mi yet, can you put that pattern of high, low on the yarn, so that this is their first visual prep? If you're doing do re mi, okay, can you circle the highest word? Can you circle the lowest word? Can you circle the word that's in the middle? Do you know where the new note occurs? Can you tell me? Can you show me the contour with your hand? There's lots and lots of different ways that you can prepare the concept before you actually name it. And that's kind of where you want to start. And you're going to start seeing that your kids can say, oh yeah, I hear, it's low, high, or high, high, low. And identify that and show you the contour and show you with body signs. And then all of a sudden they can write it out for you with icons. They haven't seen notation yet, but they can actually show you what it sounds like. And it's important that you do practice that combination in different rotations, just not all of the rotations available to that note. And then once they've gotten to that point where you can see that they can orally identify where that note is, that they can show you a kinesthetic movement, and that they can write it without knowing what they're really writing, then that means they're ready to be presented that note they get the note, you give them all the information, and then you're going to go back and do basically the same thing, except now you're in the practice stage and they know what it's called and they know the hand sign for it. Because early practice looks very, very similar to late preparation. And then you can kind of go on, and as you're still practicing that old concept, you start preparing the new concept as well. So that's kind of like how I would break it down. And when you get into practice, you can do things like, okay, composing using the new note. One of my favorite things to do, and I totally have this as a file on TPT, but you don't need to buy it if you know what you're doing. So you take the boom whackers. They're in C. It's really easy to figure out. So me and so are, whatever colors they are. Is it yellow and green or something like that?
I don't remember.
Okay. Right.
Orange and something. Okay. I don't know.
Oh yeah, maybe you are. Maybe it is.
But I don't remember either.
I have to look. So you take those two boom whackers. It's me. You play a song for your kids. They know it's so me. Oh, okay. Now you're going to write a composition. Can you color in 4 boxes? Can you color in 8 boxes and make a pattern using these notes? All of a sudden they're composing with so me using 2 boom whackers and 2 crayons. And that's all you need. You don't need to buy my file. I'm just telling you, if you know what you're doing. And you can add on things, give them, a specific rhythm pattern that you want them to compose to using those solfege. You get lot, add in lot, and now you have to do this with a partner because there's 3 notes and there's only 2 hands. That gets really fun. Or you let them work in small groups to compose it, and the whole class has to play it using a set of boom whackers when they're older. And that's a really cool way to practice. And they get to be creative, which is something I think that we don't spend enough of our time letting our kids do in the classroom anyways. So that's such a fun way to practice solfege with them.
Yeah, I love too that you're saying you use a lot of different methods and strategies, where what I mean by that is you have your kids playing, composing, you talked about the yarn and the, what was it, erasers? Yeah. And then, so visually, and then they're, kinesthetically, it goes back to the learning styles too, and then also singing it. So you're presenting solfege in a variety of different ways. So your kids they're internalizing it without even realizing it, and they're learning it. So I think that's really important too.
Yeah. And when you get to like writing and reading their first concepts, like if they're starting to do oral dictation, you don't want to start with, here, write it on the staff with the correct rhythm, ready, go. The first time you want to do it, maybe they see it and you read it to them and then you show it to them. Making sure that you're taking kind of like that step process. Like if somebody did this to you in, your training class in college, would you have been like furious? Yes, of course. Then don't do it with your kids on a smaller scale.
True.
Right. And that's something I wish I had known earlier. And the first time they write stuff, it's actually really, really important to just let them copy it. Like let them see it, say, okay, you see it on the staff. Here's what it is. And they copy it, because that's just that visual practice that we don't really think about giving our kids is that time of seeing it and copying it, which you think about like a lot of other disciplines, they do it. And that's not something that we tend to focus on. We want them to immediately utilize it, but it doesn't work that way necessarily.
Yeah, true.
Which is an interesting thought. And that's kind of something new to me as well. And it just... It's kind of a mind blowing thing.
Yeah. And I love how you said that too. They copy things in their other classes and other subjects. So why would they not do it in music too? We just expect them to just know. You don't remember what miso is? Like, what's wrong with you? No, well, they don't always know, and they don't always remember. So it's a lot of review, a lot of copying what you're doing. And then eventually they're just it's going to become more and more familiar to them. So don't be afraid to do that. Yeah.
Right.
We have talked about so much today, and I am so excited about this episode. So before we go, though, I would love for you to share any other advice or comments for the music teachers listening today about solfege, or any other advice you have about teaching music in general as well.
Okay, so one more about practicing, because
Yes.
I knew I was trying to think about it and I wanted to say it right. So when you're doing oral dictation, so like if you are singing a pattern and the kids have to write it down, before you get to the writing part, give them a card with a different solfege pattern. It doesn't matter if multiple kids have the same cards. You sing a pattern, and if it's theirs, they have to like hold it up. That's it. Just identifying that this is what I see and this is what it's supposed to sound like, and making that connection is going to help get them there faster.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on. Gosh, I think teaching solfege, the biggest thing that you need to know is that you really just have to kind of take your time and be patient with the kids and yourself, because it is not something that it's not sort of one of those things that you come out of college music education really having a lot of great experience with and really being prepped with. I feel like rhythm, everyone's like, okay, I got it, we're good to go. But solfege is kind of a difficult sort of topic, and there's lots of different thoughts on it, and we get in there. But if you take the time and really build all of this stuff, your kids will be able to actually utilize what they see and become self-sufficient. And that's something I think that's really important that we don't stress enough, is that you're not just feeding them the notes all the time. And that can be hard where, you're in a spot where, you have performances and things like that, but it's hard to let go of that side of ourselves that wants to be a perfectionist, but I think it's important.
I love that. Well, let everybody know where they can find you online and connect with you.
Absolutely. So I am Mrs. Stouffer's Music Room. You can find me on Facebook at Mrs. Stouffer's Music Room, and on Instagram and Pinterest and all those other things with the small handles, it's Mrs. S Music Room. And I also have a website, mrsstauffersmusicroom.com. It looks like Stouffer's, the frozen food people, but they give me no money, so you have to say it differently. So hopefully that helps you remember it.
Yes.
You won't believe how many times I see targeted ads for lasagna. I'm like, no, just by chance. I'm not interested in you.
No way. That really happens.
Oh yeah, all the time. All the time.
Oh girl, that's crazy.
Just shows you,
like Big Brother is watching.
Right? Apparently my name is enough to get me lasagna ads.
Oh my gosh. Well, you should just say sure and just get a bunch of free lasagna and put it in your freezer.
Right? I feel like they should give me at least free lasagna if they're not going to give me any money. Exactly. Or mac and cheese. I'd be okay with that.
Yes. Well, I've enjoyed this conversation so much, and I know the listeners are going to, they're going to find it so helpful, because this was just amazing. And I appreciate you so much coming on the podcast.
Oh my gosh, I've been so excited for this. Thank you so much for having me. This is really amazing.
Thank you so much for listening in to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, I would love for you to review the show and leave a rating on iTunes. To find out more about how I can help you gain momentum in your elementary music teaching career, head to thedomesticmusician.com, where you'll find free downloads, courses, the blog, and so much more. Continue teaching music and never doubt the impact you're making each and every day in the lives of your students.